Hi everybody, Vector here. Today I wanted to talk about what I call the Auxlang problem. Auxlang is short for International Auxiliary Language, and it essentially refers to a second language that people pick up in order to communicate internationally. So if you understand what that means, you might be like, well, isn't English the international language? And it is. It is the most widely spoken language in the world right now, but it also kind of stinks. I think most English speakers can agree that it's a very strange language and very difficult for a lot of second language speakers to learn. It has a lot of irregularities. The alphabet is inconsistent. You have words like though and through, where you just have to memorize how it's pronounced, even though it's spelled the same. And you also have a lot of unusual sounds, which aren't present in that many other languages. So all these factors together makes it so that even though English is the dominant language, it forces a lot of people to have a lot of difficulty in order to participate in English speaking areas. So you have a place like, I don't know, for example, the internet, where everyone's connected. But in order to participate in most internet discussions, you have to be able to speak and understand English. There are translators, of course, but then when you get into anything like, for example, meeting people in person, then translators become a lot less effective. And when you have other languages that make English more difficult to learn, then that becomes a bit of an issue. Because most people don't really know this, but language difficulty is based off of how similar your language is to another language generally. So, for example, Dutch is not inherently an easy language to learn, but it's very similar to English, so that makes it very easy for English speakers to learn. However, Chinese or Mandarin Chinese is very difficult for English speakers because it's not so similar to English. But what most people don't really realize is that that goes the other way around too. So if you think about how long it takes for you to get fluent at Mandarin Chinese, now think about how long it'll take for a Chinese speaker to learn English. It's going to take forever, essentially, for them to be fluent. And when English is the global language, what you're doing is you're making it so that everyone who has a language that's similar to English, they're allowed to learn it very quickly, relatively speaking. Meanwhile, people who have languages that are a lot more different, like Chinese, Japanese, Korean, for example, they have to learn this language just as fluently as other people in order to participate in these sort of groups and also be taken seriously. So this can be like a pretty big issue depending on the exact situation. I won't really get into it, but I'm sure you can imagine. So the sort of issue has, a few solutions that we can think of, other than just like, better education and stuff in general, which teaching a language is still pretty hard. Most of us can't remember what we learned in Spanish class. One of the most straightforward solutions is to, just make a different language into a universal language. So people's first instinct might be to, look at the most common languages and be like, okay, so English is the most popular right now, but it only has, 1.5 billion speakers, which is a lot, but it's not even one fourth of the total human population. So we can look down at like the other languages that are, top five most spoken languages in the world. And, if we go through them, then it's like number two, Mandarin Chinese. Most English speakers probably don't want to have to learn Mandarin Chinese just to participate in online spaces and stuff. Number three, Hindi, which I don't actually know how difficult Hindi is, but it does have an entirely different alphabet, and most English speakers would also probably not want to learn that. Number four is Spanish, which is, relatively easy, but still has a lot of the same issues where it is a lot easier for European speakers, but not others, or potentially. And then number six is French, which just, it has a lot of the same issues as English. So a lot of people looked at, this sort of stuff, and then the very logical answer is, okay, if all these languages are, really hard for speakers and isn't neutral and difficult for people to learn, then there's an easy solution. we just make our own language, which obviously making a language isn't easy. But when you make a language, then that means that you can make it as neutral as you want, you can make it as consistent as you want, you can make it as simple as you want. So what people did back in like the 1800s and honestly even before was to just make a language meant to be universal. The most famous of these is Esperanto, and Esperanto still has hundreds of thousands of speakers today, and it's still very popular for a constructed language. But the issue is that this was made in the 1800s, and so the dude presumably did not have much access to languages that weren't European. So this kind of led to the same issue where, it's very, very easy and simple to learn compared to natural languages. You can learn the entire grammar in a single day and learn the vocabulary in like a matter of months. But in terms of the sounds in the language, in terms of the grammar, in terms of the terminology, it's all still very European. So like, for example, the word the in English is called the definite article, and Esperanto has the definite article, which, the is a really common word in English, so you would expect it to be easy to just throw in, but it's actually a word that is not present in a lot of languages, and it's very difficult for someone to actually properly know when to use the word the. So even though Esperanto is easier than a lot of natural languages, it has a lot of criticism for not being, a truly universal language, even though it's meant to be used universally. However, since Esperanto is so popular, relatively speaking, there has been a lot of studies on it. These studies aren't like super huge or widely supported or have like, as rigorous of a review as you would want in a sort of scientific study like this. But out of all the other constructed languages that have been made over the years, Esperanto actually has a lot of pretty decent use cases from what I've seen. I've read a lot of reports of people being able to become fluent or at least conversational in Esperanto in a matter of months, no matter their background, even people with languages that aren't European. I've seen studies where it's been used in schools in order to see how well it works for third language acquisition. And as a second language, it's very good for helping people attain that third language very quickly. So among these studies, and there's a lot to look at really, especially since I haven't done like, a ton of thorough research. I've gotten a lot of this information secondhand, so I could do more research myself. But Esperanto is proof that, a new world language could actually be really helpful. Having a language that people can learn relatively quickly and all that has a lot of real world benefits, even if, not everyone adopts it. However, it comes with the major caveat, which is that a language that you create is only as helpful as the number of people who decide to adopt it. And when I talk about the Auxlang issue, the number one issue is actually just getting people to learn the language, because as it turns out, there is a lot of resistance for an artificial language. People don't really want to learn a language if it's not, quote unquote, useful. But of course, the irony in this entire thing is that what makes an artificial language useful is based on how many people adopt the language. So it's a bit of a, what do you call it? Vicious cycle where in order to make this language useful, you need people to learn it. And in order for people to learn it, the language has to be useful. So it's a bit of an issue, really. So in order to get around this, Esperanto had a lot of, I guess you could call it really heavy advertising, where people would push really, really hard for this language to be popularized and used. The creator of the language, I heard that he went out into the street, had this petition, had people sign it, and said, in order for a world peace, sign this to promise to learn this language and teach your kids. And he tried to get, as many signatures as he could. But ultimately, in the wider world, Esperanto never really took off in a way that most people really wanted it to, which is to say, it's still very big for a constructed language, but most people that I know, they've never even heard of it until I brought it up. That being said, something that most people don't really know, unless they get involved in these Auxlangs, is that there's a second part of this issue. Even though the general population isn't that aware of Esperanto or is really interested in using it, there's also an issue with the Auxlang community itself. And that is that the Auxlang community can't decide what language they want to promote. The way I described this with one of my friends is that saying the Auxlang community is kind of like saying the sports community or the basketball community or whatever, where even though people are tied by this thing that they all enjoy, there are different factions within that community, and they will not agree on everything. So you have the general population who is not interested in learning these languages, and you have the Auxlang community where they can't decide on the one language they want to promote. And this is because the design of Auxlangs can get pretty complicated. For example, making a language that is easy for literally everyone is kind of hard. If you get like 10 people in a room and try to get them to decide what type of language would be the easiest for everyone to learn, you're not really going to get that much agreement, because some people think, oh, this would be better for people to learn, this one would be easier. Like as an example, you could just take multiple of the most spoken languages, but then you have to figure out how to combine English and Chinese into the same language. And you just have to figure out how to mesh these two completely different languages with different grammars and different alphabets and just say, oh yeah, this will be easy for everybody. But will it? Because if you put in one grammar point from one language, it'll be easier for one person but not the other. That sounds kind of confusing. So as a simple example, for English speakers, adjectives come before nouns, but then in a language like Spanish or French, the adjectives usually come after. So you can make this language and you can say, okay, do adjectives come before or after? And one of them will be biased towards these languages and one will be biased towards these languages. And if you say, okay, my language can do either of them, then all of a sudden you've just made it more complicated for both of them because adjectives just don't come after nouns in English. So ever since Esperanto was made, and even before then, you have all these people making these languages, and every single one of them, they say, this one's the best one, this is better than the last one, you should learn my language, and that's just been going on for hundreds of years, and we now have like hundreds of languages that the majority of them no one speaks at all, and some of them some people speak, other people speak, and nobody really wants to be convinced to learn the other language because they just disagree with some part of it. So there's like a real irony for this sort of thing where you have an entire community where everyone wants everyone in the entire world to speak this one language, but even those people themselves can't even decide on what language that would be. And it feels a lot like the Tower of Babel, which I don't think the irony is lost on most of us. But of course, that is to say that not all of this is hopeless. There is a new language that came up called Tokipona, and it's not meant to be an Auxlang, but it is the only language that is not just, made for some sort of media like Navi for Avatar or Klingon for Star Trek or whatever, that has reached near the popularity of Esperanto. There is a lot of controversy as to whether Tokipona can be used as a world language, but the fact that there are so many people who are interested in speaking this constructed language proves that there still might be interest for people to join in together and learn this new language if it interests them enough. And even though there is some people who get criticized for, making new languages when there are already so many languages out there, I still do feel the need to point out that there are a lot of standards that have been replaced over time. It's not like all of the standards that we have right now were in place forever, Like the most widespread one I can think of is the metric system, which isn't super new, but there was a time where not every country used a metric system, and people said, use this system, it's better. And then everyone agreed, and everyone learned, and metric system got put in schools, and now pretty much everyone knows the metric system, even for the most part Americans, even though we don't really use it in our everyday lives. The other one that I usually like to talk about is also USB-C, because USB has multiple standards, but the USB-C plug is something that was introduced because they considered it an improvement over other USBs, and every single, manufacturing company has ended up using that type of plug. I'm assuming not out of like the goodness of their heart or anything, but just because they realized this is better for us, this is more efficient, this is how we're all going to agree to do this. So I guess what I'm saying by all of this is that if you're ever interested in Auxlangs, do check them out. There are a lot to choose from, and if you ever do feel like supporting a new world language is something that you'd be interested in, then definitely look into them. Because during the internet age, a lot of them have been revived. Like Esperanto was probably declining up until the internet, where it kind of blew up again because it's so much easier to share around resources, talk to other people who are interested in the language, and even if these languages never really reach the general population as a new world language, it's just fun to look into them. So yeah, I know I started kind of uploading a bunch of Auxlang stuff out of nowhere on my channel, but this should hopefully give some explanation as to what they are, why I'm interested in them, and why I ended up making my own. So I think that's about all I have to say on this subject. So see y'all later and have a wonderful day.